which I think is worth the council knowing, especially with Jeff here. But it was in praise of Touch a Truck, and they just appreciated the event and how well organized and thought everything was spectacular. So just thought that was worth passing along. Did I miss anything?
No.
I think those 1,000 hot dogs just went so smoothly because at the end we gave 2 away without buns and they were gone. So, and the little kids didn't care. So
Yeah, it was like perfect amount. Huh?
it was great counting.
Oh, good, that's nice. Good. You did a great job.
Oh, well, thank you.
It was really good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, did a wonderful job overall. That was a great event. I thought, outside of the cool weather again, nobody complained it was hot. So it was really good.
Entire committee.
Yeah, great job. But thank you for doing that. Anything else? Council? Okay, move on to item number 2, our discussion review of our resident survey questionnaire.
Great. I don't know what the easiest way to pull this up to make sure it's on the screen is going to be. I can plug in, or if it's easier to just go over if folks have copies in front of them. I know we're recording, so I don't know if that needs to be up there for any remote viewers.
I think I want to pull something up.
Okay.
Sure.
You're just looking for the questionnaire, right?
Yep. Yep, just that Word document. While we're getting that pulled up, I'll just go ahead and preface this by saying we've made a few changes around the edges from last year's survey, or last iteration of this survey, which was in 2022. Obviously, there have been some changes in the city since 3 years ago, but largely we want to preserve the trend line questions as much as we can so that we can track changes in health of the city and residents' attitudes about key issues that we see going forward. So that sort of sets the stage, I think, for some of the questions that we have up front here. So on the first couple pages, you'll see that we have sort of our warm-up questions, which are high-level health of the city metrics. So we have a general direction of the city, overall quality of life rating, and our rating of the city today compared to 5 years ago. We are also asking residents what they like most about living in the city, asking them to rank a few key issues so that we can understand where residents' priorities lie, if there are some areas that we should be focusing on in particular that might be different from the last time we conducted this research. And then how likely residents are to recommend the city as a good place to live. So again, these are really high level health of the city type questions that will help us track changes over time compared to the last time we
So
did
on
this.
that, on the
Please.
one about ranking,
Yes.
we have 7 is the least important, but we only have 6 choices. So
That will need to be fixed. I think we removed an
Something, I
item from that
remember,
list, right?
because we
before-
said we had nothing to, I think it was housing.
That sounds
Take
right.
it off.
That sounds right. Okay, we'll make sure that gets changed in the question wording before we program and go live. So the next section of the survey here is looking at some attitudes about the city, getting a little bit more specific. So we're asking residents to agree or disagree with a series of statements or sentiments about the city, whether they feel safe living in West Haven, whether they feel it's a good place to raise a family, whether the city provides all the services they think it should provide, whether the city has the kinds of businesses they're looking for, how they feel about the job the city does managing city services, whether they feel the city is growing and developing in a positive way, whether the city has enough parks, trails, and recreation areas, whether there are job opportunities in or nearby West Haven for people like them, and whether there is an appropriate range of housing options for people in various life stages. And then we have one follow-up question there for any residents who suggest that there are services missing, so they disagree with the sentiment about city services overall. We're just asking them to follow up, tell us a little bit about what services they would like to see or feel are missing from the city's slate there. So Next page, we start to get into evaluations of city services, residents' attitudes about performance of various services that are provided directly by the city or by an agency that the city partners with. So those service evaluations, satisfaction scale from 0 to 100, asking residents for any comments that they have about city services, specifically interactions that they may have had. And then we move into our budget allocation question, which I think I'm on page 5 right now, if that's helpful. Sorry, I realize I'm not scrolling with the
Maybe I went way too far.
questionnaire. No, you're fine. Okay, one more down, sorry. Oh, yep, there we go. Budget allocation. So, this is just a way to gamify a little bit any improvements residents might want to see to city services. So asking them to allocate a hypothetical $100 share of the city's budget and what services they might like to see improved. This again is sort of a helpful way to derive an implicit ranking of areas that might need attention, but also shows the services that residents are paying most attention to personally. The next set of questions, we are asking some broad infrastructure questions, mostly about pedestrian safety or walkability in the community. So how safe residents feel walking around the city, whether there are too few, too many, or the right amount of sidewalks around their home, in the city generally, and then how residents would rate the quality of roads in their
So is that the
neighborhoods.
difference in those two, ones for
Yes.
neighborhoods, ones for homes? I thought it
Yes.
was duplicate.
We want to get, at residents' attitudes about their neighborhood specifically, and then, in general.
I really don't know how helpful these questions are if we don't know where they live.
We will know where they live. All of these survey responses are utilizing address-based sampling, and we'll geocode all of these responses so it will be mapped to residents' areas once that data is anonymized as well. So we'll be able to visualize on a map if there are specific areas of the city where residents are more or less satisfied with the sidewalks in around their homes. Any other questions on those ones? So the next section, we're asking a few communications focused questions. So where residents currently receive most of their information about the city, and then asking a little bit of a preference question to see what their top source of information would be if they could choose where they would like to receive most of their information, as well as what their least preferred option would be. So from the various channels that residents might be hearing about things going on in the city through, which of those are they most interested in paying attention to or having as their primary source of information?
I also noticed on these, we listed Twitter and Facebook.
Yes, we should change that to X now.
But I don't
And
think we use that at all. We use Instagram and Facebook,
okay,
so.
well then we
should
can just
list the
replace it.
Sources that we are.
Okay.
Using. Emily, do you know if she puts it on anything else?
No, there's no Twitter, so we, or X, sorry.
Just Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
I think there might be a typo on the one that starts out in a few words.
Yep. Do you feel the communication you currently receive from West Haven is where, well, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not good at proofreading on the spot. What is the typo that you're seeing?
In a few words, why do you feel that the communication you currently receive from West Haven is?
And it would be the response that they chose from the previous question. So extremely useful, very useful, somewhat useful, not very useful, or not at all useful would be rounding out that question.
All right.
Yeah, sorry, programming notes get a little bit convoluted there, but that's what we're going for. And then just a quick pulse on how residents feel about the cadence of communication from the city. Whether they would prefer to receive some degree more, some degree less, or if they feel it's appropriate. The next series of questions is focused on law enforcement. So some of these were asked when we conducted the survey 3 years ago. So we're asking some, again, sentiment questions about law enforcement of this in the city, whether residents feel the Weber County Sheriff's Office is professional and responsive, is doing what it takes to help keep West Haven roads and citizens safe. Whether the sheriff's office is committed to addressing the issues that pose the biggest threats to the safety of our community. Whether residents trust the sheriff's office to deter and when necessary deal with crime in the city. And whether residents feel that the city would be better served by having its own local police department rather than relying on the county sheriff's office. Again, these are all replicated from the last survey we did. We just want to see if attitudes have shifted over the last few years, knowing that this is still a relevant issue. We also asked the question about whether residents would prefer to see the city have its own local police department or maintain service with the Weber County Sheriff's Office if they knew that it would come at a higher cost to residents but it would result in an increase in law enforcement presence in the community. So trying to frame those trade-offs a little bit for residents there and ask them to choose.
This question to me though doesn't read, do the residents realize this is gonna cost them more? It says it's gonna cost the city more, right? So I don't think this would to them mean, oh, it's gonna cost me more. Oh, do we have a property tax? No, we don't. I'm gonna have to have a property tax. So there's gotta be some preference to, maybe we're gonna have to have a property tax, or do you as a resident want to pay more? To me, that's how I read it.
That is a really helpful clarification, and I think we can add something to that effect. Unless there is a clear decision that it would be funded through a property tax, I don't know that I would specify that in the question wording, but we can certainly say would result in a
Cost
cost
to
increase
residents,
to residents.
Right,
Yes,
something
yeah,
around.
we
yeah.
can specify there, but unless that decision is made or it's sort of the only option, I wouldn't want to hem us in by talking about the particular
Well, I think
mechanism.
it really is the only option,
Is it?
but we can't like say for 100% sure that that's it is at this point.
Sure.
But I don't think there's a fair question that we're gonna get the response. Of course, they want better services and the city's gonna pay for it. That's
Sure.
how I see that.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
See this now, what's paying for it.
But the question implies that for sure.
We will continue to
For
pay
sure
for
you're
it.
gonna get,
Half the people don't know that they don't have a property tax.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
So-
I would venture to guess it's more than half.
I just
Yes.
personally would like to see it worded different. I don't know if anybody else.
that's one that I had kind of circled too, because to me it implies that you are going to get an increase.
And we're just gonna write a bigger check.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a way to ask that in the reverse, like, you know. Cause it almost seems like it's maybe two questions.
Which two questions do you see residents grappling with here? Help me understand.
Well, so.
I
there's-
think what he's saying is, would you like to see an increase in law enforcement presence?
Hmm.
And would you like to see the city have its own police department? Is that the two questions you see?
Yeah, well, it sort of implies that having our,
Would increase.
will increase
The
law
police
enforcement presence. That may or may not be the case depending on the cost.
Sure, okay.
So I don't know if there's a way to ask it.
Yeah,
Or are you satisfied with staying with Weber County if the level of police enforcement presence stayed the same?
yeah.
Does that make sense?
So this question was originally
It's
taken
really
from
tricky.
a larger set of questions that were sort of asking these various trade-offs in a number of ways. So I absolutely understand what you're saying. I think the priority here should be,
I do like that you're trying to keep the questions somewhat similar to before, because that's how you're gonna gauge if there's movement, right?
yeah, having some
Oh.
continuity there is helpful, but I think your point is well taken that in a vacuum without the other questions that talked about the various iterations of those moving parts. So if it cost more, but law enforcement presence stayed the same, would it be worth it to you for the city to have its own police department? If it didn't result in a significant cost directly to residents, but law enforcement presence would be increased, would it be worth it to you to have the city have its own police department? So there are a number of levers here that this was trying to tease out I guess the question becomes, and the question I would pose to you is, without knowing exactly what the costs would be and how the level of law enforcement presence in the community would be affected, what are we really looking to know from residents? Is this a willingness to pay? Is this a level of interest in sort of localizing that service regardless of cost? Or is this really hinging on whether residents are interested in paying to support that localized presence?
Well, I think we're trying to find out the cost, because it's going to come down to the cost. Are they willing to pay more for their own police department? So I don't know that we have, and again, we don't know what the level of service would be.
Yeah.
It might be lower than the, sheriff's department.
Yeah.
But yeah, somehow we need to flesh out, this is gonna cost you more. What do you
Sure.
think?
So I think we can shift the question to specifically look at whether residents would be willing to pay more for the city to have its own police department, and leave the question of the level of service or any effects on the level of service out. I think if we do that, we need a follow-up question that asks specifically about the considerations they might have, why or why not, why they might be willing to pay to support a localized police department, or why not.
Do you like follow up?
I think that would be necessary if we make that shift. Does that sound like it addresses the concerns? Okay, well, we can take those notes to edit and come back with a final draft of that. And then the last few questions in this law enforcement section are asking about residents' personal interactions with the Weber County Sheriff's Office. So if they've reached out in the past year for how they reached out and how satisfied they were with that interaction, and then a comment box to allow residents to share any specific details about that experience.
Is that what we're really concerned about?
Happiness of working with Weber County.
Are we really trying to determine if people are willing to pay for it?
I think the difficulty is that either way, it's going, the cost of safety for policing is gonna rise, no matter if we do it or
For
they
sure.
do it. I mean, because we already got the numbers for next year.
Right.
So, or this year, so, it's gonna be. Yeah, I don't know, it's just, the difficult part is just trying to clarify, I guess, what we're trying to get. I don't mean, after you get a ticket, are you happy with them? I don't, it doesn't gonna work.
Right, are we taking this back to the sheriff and saying, well, 75% of the people were unhappy with how you handled something? Or do we really want to find out what kind of services do they want to have? And how much are you willing to pay for that?
We did.
I
we
guess
did the
we
question.
limited to a number of questions. Is that why we've taken these, and so what are we really wanting to know? And is this the information that we really want to know, or do we want different questions?
Trying to keep the questions, as quick to the point that we're trying to make.
Sure.
So that people will answer, because one of the biggest problems is with any survey is
It gets long,
it gets too long, they abandon it. But
but
I
do we
think,
want, what are you gonna do with this information? when
well,
we have
last time when we used it on there, it was a favorable to the Weber County, and we passed that information on to them. They were happy with that, but overall, I think one of the concerns is right now is cost. Cost to the city, cost to the residents, cost to, to make sure that we have the protection and safety we need.
So just so I understand the landscape here a little bit better, if the city chooses not to form its own local police department and continue working with the Weber County Sheriff's Office, would that still result in additional cost directly to residents, or is that a cost that the city would somehow internalize without passing it along? Because I think if the question is not a question of whether the cost increased, whether residents are going to be paying for it directly, then a lot of this set of questions becomes irrelevant. If residents are going to pay for it either way, what we really want to know is, how much are you willing to pay? What types of services do you think the community needs from our law enforcement officials? And then it can sort of be a discussion with the Weber County Sheriff's Office as to whether those are services that they can provide to the community, or if that's something that needs to be taken in-house.
Well, I was actually kind of thinking more of along this specific question, and there has been a shift in the sheriff's department relative to staffing, which may or may not affect their level of service and if they're satisfied or dissatisfied. So in some ways, I think that question could be sort of helpful in assessing the current state of, of law enforcement. If they called and took a longer than expected time to respond, I think that could show up in that question.
It's not gonna matter if they don't have funding to pay for more employees anyway, it still boils down to the cost.
Well, they're getting increased funding, right, through us.
Yeah.
Or the contract cities, which is sort of how
It's
it's
a lot.
funded. And I do think it does sound like it continue to increase, each year, and this year was a noticeable increase.
I guess the question is, would we ever, if we stayed with Weber County, would we ever have to pass those costs along to the residents? Would we ever consider that, okay, yeah, it has now become so expensive that we are going to have to pass along the costs? And I think that's the question. that we need
I'm
to
kind of
ask.
thinking we almost stay with the original question, switching it from city to resident, the cost. Because that's really what it's going to boil down to.
We can certainly do that. I think going back to the original question, if we don't know what effect it would have on the level of law enforcement presence in the community, I would still want to strike that clause. Will you scroll up just a little bit so we can look at the wording there? So this S-Police option question there. So if we are looking at whether residents, I guess the question is less about whether residents want the city to have its own police department or stay with the Weber County Sheriff's Office, or if they would be willing to pay for an increase in law enforcement presence generally, or if they would.
What about
Guess
this?
that's-
I'm just,
Please.
this might not be right, but. Maybe it's simply, would you prefer to have your own police department? One question. Would you prefer to have, Weber County? And then, if you answer yes to, let's say, having your own, would you, then there's a follow-up question, would you still prefer that option if it cost you more money? In the form of taxes or whatever. And the same with the county. Does that make sense? So if you say, well, if you choose one, now I gotta answer, do I still want to stay with that if it costs more?
Sure.
And then maybe just a broader question that's like, why do you feel one is better than the other?
Yeah. I think we can do that. I think my only concern with asking the question that simply is that residents don't have context to make, residents don't necessarily have context to make that decision. So part of the reason the survey experiment here was designed the way it was 3 years ago was because we were trying to provide a little bit of context. So if we are continuing with the same level of service, but costs are going up, how would you prefer the city proceed? If the level of service would increase and costs are going up, what would you prefer? So I guess that again brings me back to the question of, are we looking at a scenario where costs are going up regardless? Or do we know that if the city were to have its own police department, it would not be passed along to residents? Because if that's not even a
Oh, no,
possibility.
it is, or it will be.
Costs will go up
So,
either way. They'll
yeah.
Likely go up more if we have our own police.
Okay,
And I
But you're
think
still
that
allowed to pay.
the
The
question,
residents are going to have.
okay.
I think the problem is that, yeah, do we want our own police department? Oh, yeah, that sounds great.
Sure.
Yes, we want our
Yeah.
own police department, not realizing that we may pay more and have less service. So yeah, I think we want to keep it as generic as possible, but I don't know how to say it either, so.
So I think if the environment we're operating in is the cost of public safety services are increasing and residents are going to, and the cost of public safety services is going to directly affect residents. They are going to be paying for that service going forward. If you know that you will be paying for that, regardless of the mechanism, would you prefer that that be money that is dedicated to the county and maintaining the relationship that we currently have with the county sheriff's office? Or would you prefer to have that be a service that is managed and run by the city? I think if we're holding constant the fact that costs are going up and we're gonna have to pay for it, then it actually becomes a simpler question of would you rather maintain what we have, sort of the status quo, just more expensive, or have the city sort of take that in-house? Does that
I think
Does that feel
that's
like it
always gonna
addresses
be
the
more
question?
expensive. It's going to be more expensive to a resident. Have our own than to help pay for the county now.
I think the details are going to come out, whatever direction we decide to go from survey questions that are very basic. Because really, you could get an answer from someone that really doesn't understand it. Councilmember Dixon indicated exactly true. If you think you're gonna get your own department, heck yeah, we want our own department versus everything's gonna go up in the future, but am I going to be liable for that cost? As a resident, am I going to be paying more either way? That is really the focus of what we're trying to get to, I guess, because if they decide to go that direction, I just like the fact that maybe keeping the question fairly simple and then we can work through it if we get a big sway one way or another. If they want to have an increase in cost to them, not to the city, I think that's a key word in the whole thing. That's just my opinion. If they're willing to look at that and go, because I'm glad we took the city out, because I think that needs to shift eventually. We can't afford maybe to continue if it keeps going that direction, which could, create other situations, but we need to just get that information down. So I'd probably just still refer back to the original question, without too many more details trying to make it more complicated, but it's up to you, whatever you guys agree to.
What does everybody think about breaking that up though, so that it's kind of specific to West Haven having its own and county?
I don't have a problem with that at all. I think you could do that with that question. If you answered, yes, I would, maybe that question falls
Then there's a
to
follow-up.
your own
Yeah.
department versus.
Would you still feel that way if it cost you?
That could be,
What-
what do you guys think of that?
But it's still going to cost more, so I think we should get that right up
Right.
front.
What it does is maybe it causes them to say, well, maybe. I'm gonna pay more. It's a hypothetical, right?
I think if the reality is residents are going to be paying more either way, that's how we should frame the question. So I think the response options here could stay the same. I would prefer to see the
Right.
city have its own local police department, or I would prefer to maintain a contract with the county sheriff's office.
So
But
if,
the question wording should probably be, the costs of providing public safety services to the city of West Haven are increasing and will directly affect residents' city tax burden. Knowing this, which would you prefer? And I think that,
And I think why?
and yeah, we would absolutely want to add a follow-up question as to why or why not, or which they prefer.
Because that's where they can say, well, I just don't feel like
I wonder if
response
that-
times are good or.
Yeah, I just kind of wonder if they will have, again, struggle with the context like you had mentioned earlier, because I think from the citizen's perspective, there's, broadly speaking, I think it's really gonna come down to a matter and function of costs for them.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure that the way it's written is, poor, except for what Councilperson Cole noted, just making sure it's clear that the residents are. Because I think in my mind, what we're trying to say is the reason why we would move to having our own police department is because we think it's gonna increase and a level of service. I think that's the crux of the issue. I think that's what we always talk about when we say we want to move to our own. I don't think it's ever based on this idea of a cost saving measure. I think it's always based on the notion that it's gonna be a better service, which, you know, I think is in that question. But we also think it's gonna be higher.
Sure.
So I don't know, I kind of like the question as it's framed, with the exception of clarifying.
Higher cost
the
to
impacts.
residents.
Yeah.
Yep,
Who's ultimately paying for it.
yes.
I like that too, significant higher cost to residents.
Mhm.
I think,
I agree with that, I just,
We can still add the follow-up question to ask residents why, so that we're clarifying after this, but yeah, if that's the goal,
it could lead them to a conclusion that, or an idea. Yeah, if we do our own, it's worth it, because we're gonna get an increase of law enforcement presence. I think that's unknown.
What if we just did the follow-up question with, would you prefer to have city's own police department? I mean, what if we just kind of followed up with that basic question?
follow up this question with,
After,
Just
yeah,
a
if they answer this,
general
yes,
preference?
they would, not the city,
Mhm.
that then move to that and just get the idea whether, how many of the percentage of people would prefer to go to our own police department.
So that's what
That's
this
the
question is
answer.
asking already, right? Whether residents would prefer the city to have its own police department or maintain its current contract. I think following up with a why or why they chose that preference makes sense, but
Yeah,
with
it does follow up with those two. I would prefer
Those
to
are the
see West Haven
options.
form its own local police
Yeah.
department.
So let's just, why don't we just keep it that way so we know what they're trying to, from their interpretation of
I
the question.
think those two are great,
We should be fine.
they're simple.
just ensuring that they understand it's going to.
it's a
them.
cost to them directly. Yep, we can make that change in the question wording. I think that's pretty straightforward. If I think we've couched the language enough there to say that the anticipated result would be an increase in law enforcement presence in the community. If that's something that we don't want to emphasize, that doesn't have to be bolded. I think what we really want to draw residents' attention to is whether the city is creating its own police department or maintaining the relationship with the county sheriff's office, and an understanding that that shift would result in a higher cost directly to residents. So maybe it's as simple as just de-emphasizing that anticipated result and asking for their preference, and then including a follow-up.
That's good.
Okay, great.
I would say though, I think that gives context again. think
Yeah, I
those
don't wanna
two
take it out.
things, You know. Local, higher costs, higher presence of law enforcement, because every time we've talked about increasing law enforcement. In the conversations I have, it's always been based on this notion that we're gonna be able to do it at a higher level of service, because. You know, just the way that the contract's set up, they're covering multiple entities and cities, and so.
Yeah, I don't wanna take that out of the question wording. I think that's important context, and you're right, Sean. But I do think maybe de-emphasizing it so that we're really focusing in on the cost and where that responsibility lies, whether that's with the county or with the city's own department. Maybe simplifies things a little bit, since we're not rotating through a series of questions that pull each of those levers in this case. Because we've scaled back, I think simplifying the question to just focus in on cost and level or area of jurisdiction maybe makes more sense. And then adding that follow-up question as to why residents would prefer one or the other. Whether they focus on an increase in law enforcement presence or if they're focused on the cost to them, I think will be helpful in clarifying what the motives for that decision are.
Would that be a text box that they would fill in?
Yes, yep, that'd be an open-ended response question.
So looking at these few questions right here, we're looking at the level of service, if they've used the service, the responses. If we come back and we find out that there's a large percentage that are dissatisfied or very dissatisfied, we do not have the ability to purchase additional services from the county.
Mhm.
Period, it's just not possible. So to fix that, we would have to do our own police department.
That's not my understanding.
So the sheriff told me that we could purchase a deputy at the rate, I think the time it was, this is actually sheriff right there, at $85,000 a year. And then that deputy would stay inside the city limits unless there was a level 1, level 2 call and he would have to leave. That's the only way we can get additional service in our city. Outside of that, they don't have enough people to probably even do that right now. I mean, they.
I mean,
they've got rid of the street crimes.
under current, but if you wanted to pay more, I just had the conversation with him today, you could increase the number of officers that were dedicated to West Haven City is my understanding.
How do you do that when there's short officers right now covering all cities?
Well, again, that's gonna be an agreement through all the cities. Say we're willing to pay more to get those officers. That's my understanding from after talking to him, is that we can do that if we wanna say that we're willing to pay for that.
I guess to address your original
But we're
question,
gonna have that concern. If we have our own police department, we're gonna have those same issues of filling positions. And
But we wouldn't have the constraints of the county and other cities paying into it. We could choose how much we put towards it financially to purchase that level of service. Where we don't have that ability now.
well, yeah, you might be limited by the amount of costs that residents are willing to pay for that increase, because I think this is just personally, and after talking to the sheriff, I think if you want to have that same level of service on your own, I think you're gonna pay a lot more for it.
Absolutely, you will. Yeah.
And maybe the citizens are willing to do that.
But we don't have a question that addresses that.
So
I
what would
agree.
you suggest?
But I
Ryan?
don't think we have one on the flip side that addresses if you want to pay more to get
So I
increased
think
county
before
service.
this police question that we're looking at, if we had a question that said, do you know that we are one of 3 cities that do not have a property tax in the state of Utah? And then a property tax usually covers additional services like policing, like additional fire stations, and just list all the things. And just a simple question would be, are you willing to have a property tax to increase the level of service through these areas in our city? And then you could roll into these questions, and then they're thinking about it. They're like, oh, well, if it's gonna cost me more and we don't have a property tax, okay.
I would, if we want to ask the direct property tax question, which I think we have in the past, we actually sort of veered away from that with this revision because we wanted to simplify things a bit. But if it would be helpful to ask the property tax question specifically, I would actually ask these evaluations of the current service question first,
Mhm.
and then follow up with that property tax question of whether residents would be willing to pay a property tax to provide additional services to the city, or to continue to provide an adequate level of service to the city. I think to start with that and then ask these evaluation questions would maybe be leading in the wrong direction. I think we want to get their attitudes about the status quo first and then ask about a potential change. But I think we could absolutely do that if that's helpful.
I would say, Mr. Mayor, if I could, as it relates to a direct question about property tax, that can be sort of a two-edged sword, and it really depends on what you're willing to do with that information, because if people overwhelmingly say no to property tax, which is more than likely it would, they can sort of use that in sort of this process of going through the truth and taxation process to institute or increase the property tax, and I'm not sure that's there are other options for the city to consider, whether it's the municipal energy tax, which I think would be a first step, and then ease into the property tax. So I just caution you in the sense of sometimes those questions can be used potentially in a way that maybe was unintended when it was asked.
I think that's fair. I just think that if we get the responses back that people say, yes, we want a police department, yes, we're dissatisfied. I don't think that's gonna be the case, in my opinion. I love the sheriff's office. I think we have the level of service we need currently. But if the residents come back and it leans that way, we're gonna have to push for a bond, which means that we're gonna have to have a property tax, and we're gonna have to.
I would say let's examine the current landscape first, because we don't know what costs would actually look like. We don't know how much of a property tax would be required to bring this service in-house, where there are so many unknowns from the city's perspective right now. It seems like an unfair question to pose to residents. We're not giving them all the information because we don't have all the information. But if we find that residents are largely dissatisfied, and even if it is a higher cost to them directly, they would like to see the city bring that service in-house, then the action or the process goes into place.
Take the
Yeah, the
next
city
step.
starts taking action to fill in some of those unknowns. And that's when you would want to go to residents to understand their opinion with all of those cards on the table. We want to make sure that we're asking questions that are fair to residents and that are instructive for you. If we don't know most of the outcomes of this decision, we should start with how do residents feel about this decision in the abstract, and then get more specific when we have more information, would be my counsel here.
And I think we do have a good idea of what it would cost and everything, however, this is going to be, we can't go through and explain it all.
Yeah.
This is not a place to educate, this
Yeah.
is.
I think that's fair.
Surveys are poor educational tools, unfortunately. They're great at gathering information. They're not great at
And there's
disseminating it.
Something significant, then we maybe follow up later.
Sure.
I agree with that.
That would be my
Move on from
recommendation.
there.
Yes.
Do we think we're okay with what we've done, or?
I will make a note to shift the question wording here so that it reflects the cost directly to residents, and add that follow-up, why do you have that preference question, just so we're making sure that we're examining that completely. Okay. And then looking at, and I just jumped into the wrong draft. So our fiber internet questions here, we wanted to get some idea of awareness of the city's Utopia network, and whether residents are currently using fiber internet in their homes, who their provider is, and how satisfied they are generally. And then we have a set of questions here about growth in the city. Growth has become a little bit of a four-letter word all up and down the Wasatch Front, but we want to see if residents' attitudes have shifted compared to 3 years ago when we asked these same first couple questions. So the pace of growth and why they feel that way. And then we're looking at some commercial development questions specifically. So how residents feel about the availability of different types of retail or commercial opportunities in the city. So whether they feel we have the right amount, too many, or not enough of a number of categories there. And then we're asking residents what they think would be most needed moving forward. So if there are stores, restaurants, additional commercial developments, what they would most like to see. And then what features of future commercial development or commercial areas are most important to residents. So are they interested in more walkability and pedestrian friendliness? Are they more interested in making sure that commercial areas have sufficient parking, et cetera? So looking at how important each of those things are to residents.
Why are we asking about architecture? If we can't really dictate what it looks like anyway,
We can with businesses, commercial.
on every front?
I had to read the question, I guess, but these were Stephen I think was involved in, and I think you can, have standards relative to commercial.
Yeah,
I think it went away.
Yeah, I think we did either.
I think there's, I don't know, that's kind of a little bit broader question, but like, we're not going to dictate what Walmart's going to do. We're not going to dictate what some of these larger ones are.
And if I'm recalling correctly, I think the goal from the planning perspective here is to get a sense of what vision residents have for commercial areas in the city, whether it is more modern or a little bit more classic sort of heritage focused. And maybe that's not something that the city can entirely control, but I think it is something that can inform how things are zoned and what,
It doesn't matter what the zone is. If they build into C2, they're limited to whatever those development standards are. You can't tell like Walmart to do one thing and the next restaurant to do something else. Is that based, right? So I guess I don't understand. What's the relevance of this? Cause even if they say we would like it to be modern, how do we do that?
You could do form-based codes and different things. I mean, is the question, can we impose architectural standards on commercial?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you can. That's why Clinton has the prairie style architecture. And if I've missed something, something's changed in the state statute. But they specifically said you couldn't do it for single family residential. I think that came out, but I think you can for multifamily and commercial. So that's how I recall it. Does anyone recall it different? Okay, that's my understanding. Let me clarify that too.
If we just, even if we ask a question, it might give us some information if we're on or not at this point.
And then the next couple questions here look at residents' attitude toward public transit options, current and potential future options. So whether residents think it should be a priority for the city to coordinate with UTA to explore future options in the city. And then we have a question here about potential revenue sources. And this one, if you'll scroll back up there, yes, thank you. So we did have this question about potential funding mechanisms for infrastructure improvements specifically. So for roads and sidewalks, or for public safety and law enforcement, or if we were looking at a sales tax to support recreation, arts, and cultural programs or amenities, what level of support residents would have for each of these individually. Again, hypotheticals, just looking at different levers that the city could pull for various service provisions. So I think this sort of delicately or gently gets at what you were asking about whether residents would be willing to pay a property tax. But in a context where we're looking at just the cost of services generally increasing.
There's a spelling mistake there. The city of West Haven continues to, I think it says should be evolved.
Oh, yep. We'll fix that. Okay. And then we get into our demographic questions. These are largely just to ensure that we have a representative sample of residents in the city as a whole. So pretty standard set of questions there.
Any questions on anything else?
It's really interesting how hard this is. You wouldn't think that it would be this difficult, but how many meetings have we had before this? So, yeah, it is a difficult process.
It's an art and a science.
Only question we're missing on there, are we buying a bus for transportation?
Wait, what?
That
was part of this? Oh, okay. Okay.
Giving us one. I think you
Are
offered
we-
us for us.
Are we gonna have more animal control?
Letting the passion in. Okay.
That is
How do you
always
feel about
fun.
that?
Happy about the 29% increase.
Okay, no.
Let's turn it over to,
Well, I am curious to hear about the UK response pieces to that. I don't know what specifically that people would have issues with, but you know, hopefully in the connectivity world of UTA, this will slowly help to navigate that, so.
Can I ask one other question? Do you find cities do these surveys? Do they ever survey the businesses specifically?
We have worked with a couple cities who have surveyed business owners in their communities. It tends to be a more focused set of questions. So surveying the business community isn't something that we do on as regular a cadence as reaching out to residents, but if there is a specific rezoning consideration, or if we're looking to, you know, change or improve something in the city's business community, looking for economic development opportunities, there might be specific motivations to survey the business community, where this is more a general health of the city approach.
I was just wondering if it might be helpful, maybe Sean, you have some experience. From an economic development standpoint to survey existing businesses. And I don't know what those questions would look like or anything like that. And I just wonder if it's been done and if it would be helpful for us going forward, and trying to, you know, find for now.
Let's get there's some blank here.
We'll go pretty fast, but I will tell you this, I think, there are a lot of, so some commercial areas develop their own, like what you would call their downtown, like commercial groups, whatever. And you can, you know, get some perspectives on that, but it just really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I think. So anyway, because I get to see all kinds of cities, I think it's a great question. I'll go fast. This one you already know. So we're really going to be talking about our 5-year service plan and kind of what we intend to do in the next 5 years. I will talk a little bit about 2025. It's just some minor modifications in this area, but some of our focus has been, we're trying to really envision this regional perspective. And so there'll be some modifications for any of your residents that are using the 470, which is actually our major north-south bus. It runs the longest, it runs every day. And it's going to have some changes with the Davis Tech campus, as well as the Layton Hills Mall. And it's going to be accommodating what we would consider to be future developments as it gets more in a regional perspective. One of the things that Layton City wanted to do is they stopped funding the Midtown Trolley that they call the Layton Hills Trolley, because they have so much growth on the west side of Layton. And so this kind of sparked some of that as a discussion piece. So, but that has already actually taken place. April 13th was our change day. And from now on, our change days are always going to be in April, obviously going to be I think it's like the second Sunday, or something along those lines. And so if anyone does take that Layton, you know, front runner, that free trolley is no longer there, but there's still plenty of service. But it helps us because just like, you know, your Weber County Police Officer, Sheriff's Department, the more homogenized we can make our vehicles, the more we can interchange them should they have maintenance issues. That's always going to be a challenge for us. And so we are actually trying to step away from specific modifications to a vehicle. Next slide. The 455 is going to become a change, and this is April of 26, just notifying you of this. Considering April of 26 in general is going to be the year of Weber County as a whole. There's going to be a lot of modifications, certainly in Ogden City specifically, but also in the areas that are doing connectivity as well. So the 455 is going to be shortened a little bit to the D Event Center. And it is because there's going to be increased services in the other, and you can see this on the 604 and the 610. And so as we do this, we are trying to create Farmington Station to be kind of one of our mobility locations, because of future investments that are going to be in 2028. So we're trying to already align with that a little bit more. The 455 goes from Weber State University, and it actually technically right now goes all the way down to the University of Utah Research Park. And as you can see, there'll be some modifications as we get to 2028. Next slide is the 601. And as you can see, this is an Ogden specific location. It's the trolley, again, being discontinued with the investment into OGX, which is our bus rapid transit investment. The trolley is not well utilized anymore. And so we're working with Ogden City to really kind of capitalize on how they can get that connectivity to their businesses, specifically 25th Street, but also in, as you can see, as a whole. And so what we are doing again is doing a vehicle that is going to allow us to have more flexibility, and also connect to their business center, so. Next slide. The 604, this is going to be the 30th Street access to Weber State University. It's gonna start to improve, as you can see West Haven on this one. This is gonna start to butt up against the west side pieces as well as hitting the Roy Frontrunner station as well. So this one is going to be really something that could be slightly impactful to your residents. If they have any intent of getting to any of these areas, including the Ogden Hinckley Airport. You might have seen a request for, there is actually this interesting dynamic at Hinckley Airport. There's a old bus stop that we don't service very much. It's only got like service twice a day. And somebody had put an office chair there because it's literally just a pole in the ground. We appreciate the intent. We aren't going to be keeping using that, so we haven't done any investment in it. But it looks lonely and sad, and so we feel bad about that. But there'll be another stop along Hinckley that'll be more effective. Next slide. The 610 is a new bi-directional. It's on 12th Street, Harrison Boulevard every 30 minutes. Again, we are starting to look at frequency. OGX has been incredibly successful. Obviously, that is focused on Ogden through their downtown to Weber State, but because it's every 10 minutes, that's a huge game changer. And so frequency again you're gonna start to see more of that investment as well. Next slide. The 612 is again that into the North Ogden area, hitting Harrisville and Ogden City, as well as just south of Ogden. And this is what we call an IMZ area, and you can see that it's kind of highlighted. And I'll probably explain, I can't see if I'm going to explain that next or not. But this is really, no, it doesn't. Okay, thank you. So an IMZ zone is basically it's basically an innovative mobility zone, and it's where we have service that we think could add value to that, but it's on a lower scale. And it's these on-demand vehicles that are co-branded. So you basically use them like an Uber or a Lyft. You have an app-based product. If you have like a pass, you just put your pass in, you don't have to pay for it more. But if you don't, it's simply $2.50. And which is our standard fare. So if you're going to catch a bus, same price. And it's really designed to become this local interconnectivity piece, especially for areas, even though it might not seem like there's a large area, some of those areas on the east side are quite elevation challenged, if you will. And so we have found this to be very effective in that connectivity piece. It's going to connect certainly to major stops that we would have. Bus stops would be part of this. The biggest change is that it actually can also be this super local. So if you have older residents, they can access it and go to Walmart. So next one is 625. This is going to be modified and discontinued because of the changes that we are making within the Harrisville area as well. So Harrison Boulevard is obviously serviced by OGX to a large extent past 26 South. And so that is going to be why that is being changed as well. Next slide. The 630 is going to have better service. That's going to be 30 minutes. Going to go to Pleasant View Station, which is, we are excited. We now dare to talk about that because we know that that's going to be part of our future expansion. And we've actually currently been buying right-of-way and land in Box Elder County, Willard, Perry, and Brigham City, with the intent to have 2 more stops, one in Willard. We have 47 acres there for a transit-oriented development. And then we have 10 acres in Brigham City for a stop as well in Frontrunner moving forward. That's not going to be probably till the 2040 to 2050 decade timeline, just to keep it real. But we do know that the Pleasant View Station is going to be a huge part of that. And we are working with Union Pacific in order to get right of way for those connections. Thank you. And then the 645 is going to have increased frequency again, down Quincy Avenue, 30th to 36th Street, and then up in that area as well. It is also going to be Monroe Boulevard to 1100 North. Again, this is more of the I guess you could call it the south of Ogden, connectivity pieces to that. And then it's gonna allow access to the Roy Frontrunner Station and the Weber State University, campus as well. Next slide. Sorry, it's gonna go for some of, oh, it does talk about this, I'm sorry. So this is the on-demand that I just talked about. North Ogden, Merritt, Sladeville, Harrisville, Plain City, and Pleasant View. It's geo-fenced, FYI, so you cannot use it outside of that geo-fenced location. Again, this is gonna be in 2026, and we'll talk about this more as it gets closer, but I just wanted to give you some outlines. In 2027, we are modifying a route to the Frontrunner Station in Roy that gets optimized a little bit more effectively. It's gonna replace service on an F620, and so just for context, F means flex route. And in the past, flex routes deviate about a mile outside of the articulated route. However, they're just not used widely enough, and so we want to integrate it with regular service. So we're really not keeping flex routes around much longer. 2027 is also the 604 is increased frequency on that. Next slide. 613 is BDO and extended to Pleasant View Station, increased frequency, and we want to just make sure that we're optimizing that connectivity as we go through that IMC zone. Next slide. Modified F618. It's no longer going to be utilized as a result of the increased frequency on the 613. So next slide. F620 discontinued. That's a flex route. We're going to make sure that we have better service with higher area coverage from the 604. And then 2028, that's really where the connectivity pieces are probably not going to be as applicable to Weber County and to West Haven, simply because that's going to be when we're going to implement our Farmington Station mobility focus. That means that the 470 and the 455 that you guys currently see in this area, they will stop at Farmington. They will no longer go further south. And then what's going to take its place is the Davis Salt Lake Community Connector, which is a super long name. We're going to shorten it to something like OGX, but we just don't know what that is yet. For now, we're calling it the 470X, but know that that's not going to stay. That's going to be a high frequency connectivity route from Farmington Station all the way to the University of Utah Research Park. Salt Lake City, for context, has done a lot of significant work on Second South. They actually have a dedicated bus route or bus lane, excuse me, that goes east-west. And so on average, the frequency there is about 2 to 3 minutes a bus comes. So it's quite a major investment that they made. And we anticipate that that will get utilized pretty well. Next slide. 600 is another route that's Farmington to Ogden, and it's going to be part of that northern 470 with higher frequency. And you can see kind of how that is outlined. That's not going to change significantly. Most of the frequency is going to be that piece of it. Next slide. This is a 609. That's 30-minute service to all the park and rides along 89, the event center, and goes to Farmington Station. And then the 455, it sounds like it's going to be discontinued, but what it really means is it's going to be discontinued past Farmington, so south of Farmington. There's going to be a lot of implementation of the 470X, again, that BRT that will be implemented in 28. So you can see some of the routes that are going to be that they reference. These are all routes that are south of Farmington. Next slide. 470 to 473, that is going to be, again, stopping in Farmington. And so they're going to be changed. That's going to have service just staying in mostly Weber. I say mostly Weber County because it does go to Farmington Station, but it's just along Main Street. So next slide. Questions and discussions. I went through it as fast as I could. And yeah, go ahead.
How do we get more detailed information on specific,
Routes.
yeah, and like you mentioned, there was maybe gonna be a station in Pleasant View, right?
So there currently is a Frontrunner station. However, it's not utilized because of the fact that it is not, we don't have dedicated rail. And that's our key challenge right now is the dedicated rail piece. I just wanna take, oh, I'm so sorry, you already know.
You already have a place for the stop.
We do, and in fact, it's already built out. One of the challenges, is that working with Union Pacific is, the patience again. They are, sometimes responsive, sometimes not. And so what we find typically is that it is more, it's more valuable for us to do it all at once. And so that negotiation, we anticipate that that's gonna probably be focused on after the Olympics. We have our 5 key projects that we want to get done before 2034. And when I say 2034, everyone knows that that's the Olympics, but in reality, it has to be 2032. Because we typically take at least a year to get employees hired, routes memorized, all of these other things that go with the operations pieces to that. So we're going to be doing the strategic double tracking of Front Runner. That's the big, huge one. And that's where we really want to spend our money on investment. That's going to be about $1 billion project in and of itself. That is a joint project with UDOT, but that will increase the frequency to 15 minutes on peak, 30 minutes off peak. So you wouldn't have to worry that you have to wait 59 minutes. Right now, you have to do that. And it will also include Sunday service. So this paper that I passed out, I'm happy to answer more and talk about it. I want to respect you guys have like your meeting. This is just our economics, so take a look at it. Please call me, text me, email me if any questions that I can answer for you. We did this huge study to kind of figure out what the value is to UTA, and the value, one of the top values is to people who don't ride it. We always get that question too. If you only have an average of 5% of people who ride it, how does that add value if I do not? And the answer really is quite simply, we're minimizing, I know this is hard because they're doing construction, but we are actually minimizing traffic as a result of that. And that study does detail that, and I'm happy to get you more info. Thank you. And again, just let me know.
Yeah, appreciate, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it, Sarah.